Thank you so much, everyone, for your patience. I think now we are going to get the ball rolling. Thanks once again for making the time and availing yourself to be here with us today. We have an exciting program ahead of us, and I think by the time we end, we are going to be feeling quite, energetic and inspired to go out there and, be advocates for a world whereby there's no suffering for our friends, egg-laying hens. But without wasting any more time, here's the agenda. We basically are going to have a prayer, and Francesca is going to welcome us all officially, and then we'll be sharing briefly about the Cash-Free campaign and its challenges and basically the role of advocacy within this campaign itself and also generally. And then our speaker, Sonia Mountford, who is the founder of Its Equity and has been doing a lot of work in this space, will be presenting the first half of this five-country overview that we have today on the true cost of egg production. And then we'll have a question and answer session that's going to be led by my colleague Mishka. And if you could go to the next slide, we'll then have the second session. Technology is fighting with us. Yes, thank you. We'll have the second session where also Sonia is going to be presenting and then share a conclusive summary, merging together the two presentations to basically summarize and conclude. And then we have another chance to have questions, and then Mishka is going to be helping us with that. And then we'll have the closing and we have a prayer. So this is the order of the day. So without wasting any more time again, I'm going to ask Matilda to please help us with the prayer to open up and get started. Over to you, Matilda.
Thank you so much. Let us pray. Creator of all, we gather in your presence and in the presence of the ancestors of this land. We honor your wisdom and their deep connection to the earth. Guide our hearts and minds as we speak to be good stewards of the creation. May your spirit and their spirit inspire us to protect and heal our planet for generations to come. Open our eyes to the interconnectedness of life. Grant us the strength to act with courage and compassion, that we may restore balance to our world. We acknowledge the gifts of nature and the wisdom passed down through generations. May we honor your legacy and our ancestors by caring for the earth with reverence and respect. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you so much, Matilda, for that prayer.
Amen.
Amen.
Opening the space for us and showing that we now can begin. So I'm going to hand over to our Executive Director, Francesca Di Gasperis, to welcome us all and we can proceed.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Zweli. It's wonderful to be with you here on a Monday morning. I'm super impressed that 49 participants have joined for this important session. And I can see, I already know the old friends and colleagues in the participant list. I know that we've got our friends from all over the region, including Ghana and Malawi, Zimbabwe. I'm hoping there's a Kenyan representative. There's many of you right across the region. If I haven't mentioned your country, please make sure you share in the chat where you're coming from. This is an issue that's kind of come lately to our continent. We're aware of the issue of farmed animals and its impact on our health and climate change. But because there's so much challenge in terms of access to food, nutrition, and many people really not having sufficient access, we often look at farmed animals and their plight as being something which we can think about next. We can think about later. We must put humans first. And I really feel that that is very limiting for us as a continent and very limiting for us as people of faith. That we have to always put humans before the rest of the natural world, before the rest of the sacred community of life on earth. And for us, I see that one of our former board members is also with us, but cannot hear the sound. I hope other people can hear me. If you are struggling to hear me, please do say in the chat. Otherwise, I will continue. And if you're struggling with sound and it's just you, please try log out and log back in again, and hopefully it will work. Thank you, Brenda. Thank you, everyone. Okay, so I really want to emphasize that I think that actually when we talk about justice and justice for all, we are not just talking about the human world, we're talking about the non-human world. And I think for many of us present, this resonates very deeply. That when we talk about access to food and healthy food, it should not be at the sacrifice of the well-being and dignity of life of other species or of the environment. So I think it's a very strongly held belief system that goes right back, predates Christianity. Living in harmony with the earth is really one of the fundamental tenets of our lives here on earth. And it's why we are having this session today. And Sonia Mountford is a dear friend of SAFC's. She is a tremendous researcher. She has an ability to really get to the heart of issues, and has spent a huge amount of time working with us and independently on the issues of caged hens and why it's so important. Sonia's also been a long-time Christian faith advisor to SAFC on cage-free. This is something that actually predated my tenure at SAFC, and I've been here almost 8 years now. So Sonia has been a long friend to SAFC and really a great wise voice for us in our work in this area and has guided us through the way that we work with corporates, the way that we demand for justice for hens and for all people and for nature. And so I'm really thrilled that Sonia is able to be with us today and to really give us a digested view of what she's found in Sub-Saharan, these 5 countries. As you'll be hearing, it's South Africa, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Malawi, and Tanzania. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand back to Zweli so that we can get started and look at cage-free. Why do we have this campaign? What is the importance of this? And then we'll move on to Sonia. Thanks, everyone, and so glad you're all here with us this Monday morning.
Thank you so much, Francesca. Yeah, I think it's nice to do this webinars, to come together to have these conversations about the work that we do, and just to remind ourselves also why it is so important to do this work, and not only for the planet that we're trying to make sure that the planet is livable for the animals and for human beings, but also to remember the role we have to play. So I'm going to quickly and briefly share my screen to talk about why we do this work and why it is so important to do this work, and basically touch on the need for us to have advocacy and to advocate for a better world for egg-laying hens and for all our animal species on planet Earth. So the reason why, essentially, this is like the entry, the high level of why we do this work, it's because it's subsidy, as Francesca said. We believe that no matter what you eat, life does come from life. So we need to be aware of the quality of the life that we absorb, and we need to know that we understand that the life force that supports our continued existence on this planet Earth, and also have a deeper reverence for the rights of all living beings to have a good life. I mean, egg-laying hens are one of the most, like suppressed animals on Earth. They experience the most cruelty. They spend the rest of their lives in cages. And I think that highlights the need of basically why we need to advocate for a healthier, for a better, Earth, and for better farming systems. I think this next slide basically explains it better in terms of just basically the suffering that these battery cages cause, depriving hens of their most basic needs, without even getting into the science of it. Just basically the animalistic nature of basically hens spreading their wings, managing to perch, and having enough space to just move around. In these battery cages, they cannot do that. And the Humane Society reported that on average, an egg-laying hen in cages basically live in a space that is smaller than the A4 sheets of paper, which is, we all know, that is like an access book, and that is like one page. And so these hens spend their lives in that confinement, and that can span from 3 to 8 years of basically being there, as far as they can produce, which also bring us to the other element of the cruelty that they get exposed to, because once they cannot produce eggs at the required rate, they then go to a slaughterhouse and they are culled. But another thing I want to highlight is the issue of male chicks, which is the next point on this slide. That the cruelty that they're exposed to, they basically do not even have life. Once there's a discovery that these are male chicks, they are slaughtered because they cannot be used for laying eggs, and also they're not produced for being used as broilers. The chicken that we consume from all the food chains and all the food that we eat. So we are requesting the food industry to commit to changing to cage-free as soon as possible, and making sure that by 2030 we have an industry that is prioritizing, highlighting animal welfare, and ensuring that there are no cages in Africa and in the world, basically. So regardless of economic ability, we have rights to eat healthily produced animals. And we know that in Africa, we have been told by researchers and studies that eggs are a reliable source of protein. And in terms of affordability, that is the source of protein we afford in Africa. And so we really, really need to speak against the cruelty and make sure that there are no health implications for consumers of eggs, and that not only the consumers get healthy eggs, also the animals that produce these eggs live a healthy life. And I think one way in which we can do this is through advocacy. And another way, like the way that Substate does advocacy, is basically to engage in the Fast Action Network, where you can join the Fast Action Network and get updates on how you can advocate for a better world whereby there's no suffering for egg-laying hens. So you can sign up to the FAN. There's a link there, but I think we will share the link before this webinar ends so that we can basically join the Fast Action Network and get the actions and be updated about where the campaign is going. But I thought I'd just share that we can basically do this because hens do not have a voice. It's us who have a voice, and we need to basically be a part of a collective that is calling for better farm system for animals that are produced for food consumption. And egg-laying hens are a start whereby we can start and show our advocacy. And I think I need to highlight that advocacy is very important, and it's important that we all use one voice in our advocacy, and we basically are a community that has one voice. We amplify our voice in terms of making sure that we call for a better farming system in South Africa. So you can help spread the word about cage-free, and also make sure that as many people as possible know about cage-free, and as many people as possible take actions. I will not be going any further than this point. I would like to hand over to Sonia Mountford to basically share with us their findings, and so that we can basically hear more about that and go forward and have our discussion about that. But yeah, without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and then hand over to Sonia. We're going to be uploading the slides that show Sonia is going to be talking to. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Felicia, and thank you, Francesca, for the introduction. And I'm really pleased that Felicia has set the scene as to why this work is important. I don't really touch on that in what I'm presenting today. I think many of the participants are aware of the issues, but I don't think they're as aware as Felicia and his team are of the details of these issues and how long these concerns have been going on for. I also must say I'm very impressed by not only the attendance, but the punctuality of everyone. I opened my screen and there were like already 50 participants. So it's wonderful to see that. It's wonderful to see this interest. I would like to ask the team if I can share my screen. I have made some edits. If it doesn't work, I've had some technical problems with my presenter notes today. So then we can just revert to you presenting. So I'm just trying to see if I can share. I'll go to my desktop, I suppose. Can you see my screen? Can you see it now?
Yeah.
Great, thank you. So I will begin. We've got quite a bit to get through. I was tasked to have a number of slides, and I don't think we are going to get through every detail on every slide, because I do want to leave some time for discussion. I think that's really important. Because I think feedback is very important, particularly from participants that are campaign members and also know what is happening on the ground. So let's begin. If there's a problem, please just alert me too. If the slides are not progressing or there's a glitch, please let me know. So yes, why do we need this research? Why was it commissioned? The main reason for that was that we need to have information that can inform strategy within the campaigns. As Francesca has already said, I've been working with SAFC for more than a decade. And on the poultry industry, I've been working probably for about 6 years. And through that time, I've seen the progression of groups and participants in this space. And the one thing that I have been very conscious of is how industry has changed, the intensification, the growth, the doubling down on this intensification, but how their language has not changed with that, and how their argument has not changed. But at the same time, we need to have the information to meet every point of the argument that they make. And so the research was commissioned to highlight those gaps of the lack of information that is available, readily available, and there's a lot I will show you, and how we can use the information to inform strategy for the campaign of free and caged hens. Because ultimately what we are trying to do, as Felicia has already pointed out, is helping to end the cage age, and it needs to be together. We cannot do this individually. We cannot do it as even within our own borders individually, but outside of our borders. It needs to be a coordinated effort. So part of the key research aims was to find the findings, how to advocate for policy and industry practice. I'm not going to read all of this. I also have to refer to my my notes that I've had to put on another device. So please excuse me for that. So there are several important developments which we need to better understand and engage with, as they have an impact on the realization of ending cage production in African countries. Research that I've done on the African countries actually indicate that we are moving in the opposite direction. But let's first see the background of why we have actually chosen these 5 countries, why they were chosen. So South Africa, obviously my home base, and SAFC's local home base, head office. And it was, South Africa was actually one of the most difficult to do research on for this particular research because I'm so close to it. So it was more about editing out information that I know is already in the space, in our space. And the information that I have access to, obviously it's 6 years of looking at the industry within South Africa, has also dated. So there were issues about what is the latest information. And with the outbreaks that we've had of avian flu, industry has changed somewhat with regards to even the national flock size and that. So even finding the data, clear data on those very, should be obvious information that should be out there. How large is our national flock? It was difficult. With the countries, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Tanzania, Malawi, obviously I am dipping my feet into the poultry industry. I've looked at in the past years, had a look at food insecurity issues in Sub-Saharan Africa, but I have not had a deep dive into the poultry industries of these countries. So it was both enlightening, it was frustrating, because of the lack of information that is available, the lack of data. Which brings us to this. So let's first acknowledge the elephant in the room. And what we don't know, and also what we don't know, we don't know. So I'm at the stage whenever I attend a webinar, a conference, a discussion on the poultry industry, I am very aware that there are many things that I don't know. Each time, even after 6 years of delving deeply into the South African industry, for example, I am surprised by new information. So why do we have these knowledge gaps? Why is this still a reality for the campaigns working in the dark in African countries? Due to the lack of data and scientific studies. We don't have the studies to reference that are African-based studies. There are more studies, European-centric studies on the true cost accounting of industrialized systems, but we don't have localized studies on true cost accounting. We don't even have studies on the environmental impact of the industrialized poultry industry. And when we do have some insight, it is mainly directed on the broiler industry, so chicken meat industry. Job creation is one thing that industry pushes back on, making claims that they would lose jobs if moving to cage-free. But where's the data on this? Where is the information that we can look at to show, has job creation increased or decreased since mechanization has expanded within the different countries? The nutritional profiling of eggs in different production, we make health claims. For me, the only safe health claim that we should be making is on production systems that have access to outside. So pasture-raised systems or authentic free-range systems that actually are scratching around for grubs and on grass. Because we know that there are studies that show they have higher levels of certain nutrients. We need to have studies that actually look at the different nutrient levels of the caged production system and the cage-free and free-range. Also, I would be suggesting looking at immune systems. What do these immune systems look like? Are they more susceptible? We know that there's a susceptibility to disease with regards to the densification, because those are the studies that are out there. But what about the issue of being caged? How does that impact the immune system? We have studies from animal rights groups on this, but we don't have independent studies for either argument. A lot of it's industry funded studies. The other thing that we don't have a firm grip on is the impact of global standardization and trade policies on the systems that are adopted within a country, and the scale of the impact of funding and policy adoption of digitalization, which is one of the key findings within this research that I found. So more of the barriers accessing reliable information. The literature is scarce, as I've already pointed out. And industry is historically opaque. They don't want to share information. And as I've looked back over the years from 2006, some of the literature that's available, and also industry reports, the reports were far more robust. They went into a lot more detail in the past. Now it's even very difficult when they talk about the national flock size. They don't, and even the egg size, the flock size of the egg layers, they don't differentiate any longer between the breeding houses and the laying houses. And past reports used to differentiate between that. And there used to also be clear differentiation between the broiler industry and the layer industry. So we have to wonder why these details are not available in these reports any longer. Media also lacks insightful knowledge. There's no independent media experts. We have a lot of agricultural journalists, but we also have to look at where they gain their funding from and also what they are being trained in when it comes to looking at egg-laying production. Industry do have media days. They do have workshops. And I'll come back to that a little later. So university studies in Africa predominantly also focus on research that is supported of the university and industry collaborations of agricultural faculties. We are getting more and more privatization, in a sense, of faculties, the funding that comes into these faculties, particularly in agriculture. We know that the Gates Foundation is very much embedded in South African academia, also in our South African media. And I didn't have the time to really look at what Gates funding was taking place in other African countries, because it wasn't as apparent as within South Africa, with the studies, the countries that I was focusing on. So some of the key research findings is, and one of the questions that we had as a group and representatives of these countries, excepting for Zambia, I think it was Swalisha, we don't have a campaign, an our campaign representative in Zambia, was who holds the power? Because we need to know who holds the power. Are we engaging with the people or the person that can actually say, yes, let's make this change, or no, I refuse to make the change? So who's the top dog? And understanding who the top dog is we also need to have an understanding of globalization and the impact that that has on our local sectors and trade agreements and industry mergers and influence from foreign nations on, and what is their motivation as to why there is this influence. What is their motivation for having an input in our agricultural sector, and particularly in our poultry sector. So the choice by the African Union governments to, and that is the other thing, is that African Union, they're predominantly focusing on economy, improving economy in our respective countries. And one of the drivers of improving economy for them is trade. So they're very much focused on the deregulation of, to allow trade to take place, particularly in the broiler industry, because they're wanting to export. There's also the feed, which makes up to 70% of the poultry industry production costs. Feed is a huge driver within the poultry industry. It's a huge driver into the expansion or the lack of sustainability of an industry. Sorry, I'm throwing certain things out there as they're entering my head, and I know I shouldn't do that, because let me stick to the script. But these are important points to drive home. We also know that large corporations, integrated firms. So when we talk about integrated firms, they generally have breeding houses. They grow the feed. They have the feed mills. So they set the standards, and not the standards of production, but the standards of what an integrated, they have immense power in what the sector looks like. And that integration has already been looked at, and is again being looked at, of the poultry industry, for example, by our Competition Commission in South Africa, because they recognize it as an issue. It prohibits the access from small-scale farmers into this sector. It also prevents access to market for small-scale farmers. The trade agreements, the international trade agreements that we have as well, one of the things I try to look at, because we don't export eggs per se, there isn't much of an export market, obviously because of the shelf life of eggs, and importing, fortunately for us, because we know that we have the issue of broiler meat dumping in South Africa from Brazil and other countries. But what we also need to understand is, if there is a movement and we do have technology that allows us to export eggs, we have to look closely at the trade agreements. And particularly, then we also have to look at the role of Codex, which basically sets the global standardization of standards adopted by different countries. And these trade agreements and standards are not benign. They have tremendous impact on how the industry operates, and how the industry, in a sense, is allowed free rein, particularly of these integrated dominant players. So on a country basis, your regional value chain is dominant. The one thing that SAFC has worked on for a number of years is engaging with supermarkets. One of the things out of those engagements that we could never, and we try to impress upon them in almost every engagement that we had, every meeting we had, every webinar we had with them, was the responsibility that they have within this value chain, within the egg poultry value chain. They would never accept that responsibility because they know then there is an accountability that is attached with that. And that is one of the key things that we should be looking at, is who should be held accountable for not only the cruelty, but the impact that these systems have on the environment, human health, and animal health, the poultry themselves. Again, we need to look at the impact of the feed, because the poultry feed industry and the alignment with the livestock industry, they work together as one. When the one falters, the other one falters. And when I say falters, have expansion issues or constraint issues. So I think we need to be focusing a lot more attention on the feed industry than we do. So I don't even know what slide number I'm on right now, but it's basically, it's important to understand the contextual dynamics of power, authority, and institutions in Africa as they relate to globalization, and in particular, the trade relations. How this impacts legislation, policy, and the government's drive for public-private partnerships. Almost every day in our media in South Africa, we're talking about public-private partnerships. But where does that place the power? And where does civil society, activists and NGOs go to hold power accountable? Because it's no longer our governments. So what is influencing political will and the ability and openness to authentic dialogue on the issues of the industrialized production. One of the things when we talk about the opaqueness of the industry is that recently, I don't know how many have been aware, but SAFC has been trying hard to work on the transparency issue with the Consumer Goods Council of South Africa, and obviously challenging the South African Poultry Association, who commissioned the statutory body, it's a statutory body of South Africa, the National Agricultural Marketing Council, NAMC. They conducted a study on behalf of SAPA, and to see what is the viability of the cage-free production in South Africa, and to assess the viability of this and to end cages. That study is not publicly available, but they are referencing the study and basically claiming that it's not possible. And they also claim job losses. They have an impact on the economy. It will have an impact on food security. But even with the seeking transparency and seeking access to it through the Promotion of Access and Information Act, PAIA, animal law reform, even went as far as to approach the information regulator, this NAMC study is still not publicly available. So industry is doubling down, firstly on the cruelty and on the secrecy. I would say, go as far as to say the secrecy and the gatekeeping of information. And gatekeeping of information is, from what I've experienced and what I've seen, is one of the main problems within African countries. When I talk about the supernatural organizations, when I say that government, who actually holds the power, do our governments hold power to make changes within the agricultural sector? And the more I looked at foreign direct investment and the supernatural organizations that are operating within our countries, the more I've become a little concerned about the supernatural organizations having more power, and the African nations are having less sovereignty within our agricultural system. One of the other key findings was this drive for digitalization of Africa and the adoption of the fourth industrial revolution. And the momentum that this has taken since the adoption is remarkable. It's remarkable to me that when governments have the political will and, let's say, the funding behind that political will, how quickly they focus on the rollout of these, the digitalization within our not only poultry industry, but agricultural industry, and also biomedical. Don't just think of digitalization as having devices. There's also the digitalization of the information that goes along with that, the digitalization of genetic materials, improvement of our indigenous breeds is all part of this fourth industrial sort of revolution. There's another term that it'll come back to me, what governments actually term it as, and I just find it ironic. So the African Union agenda is very much behind the need for this digitalization and fourth industrial revolution. I don't think we're at the stage of the fifth industrial revolution in Africa yet. I've been trying to find information on that, but I haven't come across any practical steps that government has made to roll that out. The one thing that is a hindrance is obviously infrastructure. And and the infrastructure of the networks, the infrastructure that would support the digitalization. So in a way, we are safe for a time, but we need to be aware that we are no longer only looking at big agriculture. We are now looking at big tech and big agriculture and big pharma together. And for me, that is an unholy alliance. So the drive for digitalization is mainly through, and the adoption of it and from a policy point of view and implementation is through the African Union Digital Agricultural Strategy, the DAS. If we want to see when we view within our respective countries, this adoption of and the implementation, let's say, of improving indigenous breeds, of increasing intensification, of upscaling small-scale farmers to this commercial mechanization, we need to go back then and look at DAS and see what they are planning within Africa and what they are rolling out within Africa. So these things should not come as a surprise to us any longer, because governments have put out and declared what their intentions are. We know we need to understand those plans and the impacts that it has on the industry. And we also, when we see it happening in industry, we need to go back and say, oh, well, where does this actually come from? And one of the intensification and this mechanization and even with the small scale farmers is to be looking at the digital agricultural strategy of the African Union. So we also need to understand the economic globalization through not only the continental free trade area, because within the African Union, and we want more trade between African Union instead of from other continents and that. We want to improve the economy within Africa, but we need to understand the impacts that that actually has on, one of the things that SAFSA experienced with the retailers was this, we had this impression that if we got them all together, we could exact change or a commitment to change a lot quicker, because we were talking to them as a sector of the poultry industry together. But what we found was that they actually closed ranks. And this is the issue with trade agreements as well, is that there is a closing the ranks, because obviously they're going to be protecting their own interest, which is the economic interest of trade. So for now, because eggs are not a commodity that is really, there is some movement within the AU of trading eggs, but it's not viable in the sense of huge economies and huge investment in it because of the shelf life of eggs. But we do have powdered eggs. It's ironic to me that one of our most expensive hotels in the waterfront, in the V&A waterfront, serves powdered eggs as scrambled eggs to their guests. And the guests are completely unaware of it, but it's a concern for me. Liquid eggs is also a concern for me when it's on, particularly on retailer shelves. Our commercial baking industry, they use obviously liquid eggs, and industry supplies them. But when it comes to a point of being able to freeze that on scale and export, we are going to be having trade wars around eggs as well. So I've spoken already about this genetic improvement of indigenous and local breeds. What has always been quite important to me was the indigenous breeds that can be used for dual purposes. So you wouldn't have to be killing the male chicks. You could be, and this is why indigenous breeds within small scale farmers and subsistence farmers, they are used. But now if we are going to have a funding and we have genetic breeding, international genetic breeding corporations wanting to improve on these indigenous breeds, they're also going to be holding the intellectual property rights for these breeds. And Hendrix Genetics is very active within Africa and has partnered with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation on improvement of our indigenous breeds. We need to understand what that means. We need to be able to challenge this intellectual property rights to breeds, improve breeds using indigenous breeds. We've seen how this has played out with the genetic modified maize. South Africa, for example, is the only country in the world that has a staple food as a GMO. And the interesting fact about labeling, and I probably will come to it again later with egg labeling, is that we in South Africa have a GMO labeling act. I think it was as far back as 2016, maybe even before that, to say that anything that has any food product that has 80% more content of GMO needs to be labeled as genetically modified. This was never enforced. And I interrogated the fact of why this was never enforced. And the reason was that globally, there's not been a consensus on labeling GMO foods. So therefore, it was not enforced within our own borders. And this is when I'm talking about power structure and who holds the power. Because even a legislated act has not been enforced. And we need to be looking at how these genetic improvements, the transparency around it, the labeling around it, and the consumer-informed choice around our eggs going forward. So, said, okay. The responsible change in our food systems, moving towards this digitalization and that is now becoming the digitalization, and I call it technocratic band-aids for systemic solutions, which is now, as I've pointed out, wholly adopted by African Union countries. They are technocratic band-aids. And it's easier to adopt these technocratic band-aids because it comes with funding, and it also comes with the opportunity for greater profits. And it's about intensification, about, they also come under the banner, these band-aids, technocratic band-aids also come under the banner of the Green Revolution. The Green Revolution has already been challenged by SAFC and groups together. And we have to also understand that it doesn't only focus on crops like maize, like soya. It also focuses, Green Revolution also focuses on our livestock industry. And also, but in particular now, we are seeing more of that focus on our poultry sector. So the historical burden of the intensive animal agriculture, we know that we have well-documented welfare issues, but the issue of nutritional food security is what industry normally combats this welfare issue with. And if we look at how industry talks about food security, they don't generally talk about nutritional food security, but they also don't talk about the complexity of the issues of nutritional food security. We don't need to be for food security, this thing of growing more food or upscaling poultry industry. It's about access to that food. We waste 1/3 of our food that we grow in Africa and globally. So it's very clear that there's not an issue of not enough food. It's about the access to that food. And I think that we should be challenging industry on the claims that they are making about food security and what they are really doing about food security. And so, for example, according to a report which forms part of the Digital Tech in African Agriculture project by PLAS, which is the Institute of Poverty in Land and Agrarian Studies, the concerns that they've raised is that policymakers, researchers, and corporate interests make claims about how digital technologies in agriculture are significant in making farming more productive, efficient, and sustainable. So efficiency is also one of the criteria. So advancement of digital technologies in African agriculture can cause negative effects, including displacement of labor in agriculture, a boom in cybercrimes, and data protection concerns. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry to interject. I think, can we sort of try to wrap up this session?
This is the last one, Zwelihle. This is the last one, sorry. Yeah, I should have asked for a time check. Sorry, please, yeah, do give me a time check. So it's not a panacea, and we need to be challenging this policy that our governments have adopted to support this digitalization of our food system, but particularly of our poultry sector. That's me, and I'll stop sharing. Okay, Zwelihle, I'll hand over to you. That's the first section. I'm sure your heads are spinning.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's been, there's a lot of information. I'm sure everyone thinks that there's so much that is happening in Africa. There is so much that we need to address. There's so much work that needs to be done. And I think this first part of your presentation just basically highlights that. I don't want to take more time because we've gone over. Mishka is taking notes, taking questions. So if there's any questions, please raise your hand, and then you can, Mishka will note your hand, and then we'll proceed. I think I see the first hand.
Yes, I think it was Halumba.
Yes.
Halumba, please do unmute yourself if you have a question. You may also pose your questions in the chat, but we'd love to hear your voice, so please do unmute yourself.
All right, thank you very much. Good morning everyone. This is Halumba Mnachonga from Ndola, Zambia. So I just wanted to ask a question specifically concerning the adding breeds to the local breeds of poultry. So don't you think that improving local poultry breeds could inevitably lead to the decline or disappearing of traditional breeds? Furthermore, don't you think that this improvement or process could result in breeds that are better suited for caged environments, which may potentially undermine the push for cage-free systems? I submit.
Okay. Do you want me to answer, Mishka?
Please go ahead and answer. Thank you.
That is, you've got it. You've nailed it completely. These are the concerns, is that firstly, we are going to be losing our indigenous breeds, which are loosely protected in some countries. But we know that our commercial breeds are being improved over the years to produce more for longer periods. And the same is and that is the focus on this improvement of indigenous breeds as well, is that they're going to become the machines, the new commercial breed machine. I think there's a twofold reason. This is just my kind of thinking that possibly why they are doing this is the issue of food sovereignty in Africa. Our indigenous breeds are adapted to the place and the climate, so they're far more resilient. So the breeding and the industry are looking at adopting and almost taking that adaptation and making a commercial breed out of it. But what you've raised is exactly it. They're wanting to not have the options of an alternative breed to what they are wanting to see within a commercialized system. I hope, yeah. But it wasn't really a question. It was, you just got it complete.
Thanks, Sonia. I'm not seeing any more questions. If you do have a question, please raise your hand using the icon in Zoom. You may also ask questions in the chat box. If there aren't any more questions, I think we can move to the next presentation. Sonia, if you're ready.
Is that me, or isn't there a section between this?
Yes,
Oh, I see there's a hand. Julius, please do unmute yourself.
Yes, good morning, everybody. I'm Julius from EAAW organization, Tanzania. The top order of power is a government in most African country, but there is this large organization like UNDP, WHO, UNICEF, and others, which can influence the government to change the policy. There is no any probability we can use this organization to make the government agree to change the policy, maybe according to your finding.
Julius, I would like to see more of the interaction with these organizations, with these supranational organizations. And a lot of, for example, the Food and Agricultural Organization, United Nations, they talk about sustainability. They talk even about the indigenous breeds being more adaptable in that. But we need to get them to make clear understandings of the impact that it has on the small scale farmers, the independence, the sovereignty. These are issues that we could be seeking. I don't want to say challenge it, but we could be seeking to at least be on the table when we are interacting with them and raising the awareness of food sovereignty is one of them that I think is, this is something that industry cannot argue against. And United Nations, FAO, supports food sovereignty within nations. So if they support that in research and in words, they need to be doing it on the ground with government. And that is one of the things that we can challenge them with.
Thanks, Sonia. Rosemary, I see your camera's on. Do you have a question? Please unmute yourself if you have a question. I think your mic's on mute, so we can't hear you. Please unmute yourself.
Oh, thank you.
There you go. Thank you. Did you have a question?
Not really. I'm just listening. No question yet.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, I think if there's no more questions, we can move to the next session. Sonia, it is your session, which is part 2 of your research. But if there are any questions, please do post them in the chat box and we'll get to them after part 2. Thank you. So Sonia, over to you.
Sorry, I was trying to access my unmute button. It wasn't allowing me to do that.
You're muted. Thank you, Sonia. You can go ahead.
Okay. Sorry, I'm also just, my screen is frozen. Okay, we'll start on this one. Let me just see. No, I can't go forward or backwards. Sorry.
If you have trouble, I can present on my side.
Okay, have you got access to this?
I do have your presentation.
Okay, I don't know if that's the latest. I hope it is, but yes, that's fine. That would be great, Mishka. Thank you. I can't even stop sharing though. That's my problem here. Can you?
Okay, I'll share on my side and it should come up.
Okay.
Please let me know if this is the correct presentation.
That is the correct presentation, yes. Is it on? No, I can't see anything. Sorry. Okay. Wait. I'm still sharing from my side. Can I try again, Mishka? Sorry.
I'll stop sharing.
Okay. I think I preempted it. Okay. Can you see that? Part 2?
We can see, yes.
Okay, and I can go backwards and forwards. Okay, sorry, there's a lot to digest from the previous one. I'm going to try and move through this one at a quicker pace. So we need to be aware of global trends because Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa and the countries that we've looked at are geared towards keeping pace with global trends. We know that there's the intensification that I've already spoken about within Africa, and as a policy, the intensification. And we also know that sectors globally, livestock sectors, are expanding, increasing, and growing, and the output is also increasing. Okay, so some of the common threads within the 5 countries is this focus on food security and the problem of undernutrition within every one of these countries. There's also the problem of non-communicable diseases, and hidden hunger, where we have the issue of obesity, but nutritionally inadequate sustenance. So the government food policies, security policies, they acknowledge the challenges of rapid urbanization and population growth, but their approaches and their policies vary across the countries. I think that they also view this digitalization and fourth industrial revolution as, they honestly do view it as a solution, because it also removes responsibility from them and accountability when we're talking about, and they've been dismal at the issue of nutritional food security. So the dominance, again, of the intensive poultry sector, increasing that, upscaling the small-scale farmers, which is a little problematic for me on another reason, is that I've worked with our local small-scale farmers here extensively, and their issue has always been not only logistics, but access to market. They don't have that access to market. So this is when you come with industry, commercial industry, working through government policy and private industry working with small-scale farmers to upscale them. So it's just creating more of the same. And the media portrays it, and our understanding, if we don't understand the true concerns within our food industry, our broken food chain, we see this as a positive. We can see this as a positive thing. Industry is working with small-scale farmers, not if it's not honoring what the small-scale farmers are doing and actually saying, no, you need to change to upscaling. And one of the things with the prayer that really resonated with me was the ancestors and the wisdom from our ancestors. And I really wonder, what would our ancestors say about the state of our egg-laying sector, but also just about the livestock and how we are farming livestock. And for me, the small-scale farmer and the subsistence farmer, particularly those that are working and with dual-purpose breeds, the indigenous breeds, should be safeguarded. It should be celebrated. But the dominant system arrogantly believes that they have the solutions without looking at how our local indigenous people and the knowledge that they have and the knowledge that they still use from ancestors and the manner in which they're farming. We are going to be losing, if we just upscale small-scale farmers and subsistence farmers and that, we are even going to be losing language. So there are a number of ways that we could be challenging the dominant message of intensification and upscaling. I'm going to go up here. So we've already spoken about the uptake of the fourth industrial revolution and digitalization. I'm not going to go into that. I just speak more about the commonalities between the groups. One of the things that I did recognize was that Tanzania has focused on safeguarding their indigenous breeds, but quite recently they are now also looking at the improvement and rolling out these new genetic breeds. So one of the other concerns is the high debt burden that Africa holds, because you're not as resilient against the globalization and the movement when you are indebted to let's say, the global north, and you are engaging, government engages not from a point of strength, but of weakness. And in South Africa, we have just been notified that we've got more foreign direct investment coming. We've also been notified by the EU that we're going to be getting funding for the Sustainable Development Goals. But all funding comes with strings attached to it. And there's no transparency in our country as to where that funding goes and what it is being spent on. So one of the things that we should be asking for is transparency on funding and what is the motivation for that funding. We really need to start being a little bit more critical thinking about funding coming into Africa. So some of the differences, obviously South Africa is dominant with the commercial egg sector. What I found interesting when I was looking at trying to find latest national flock size was that many of the, and I didn't want to include it because I wasn't totally sure, but many of the national flock size and the numbers that they're talking about is comparable to South Africa, but they're not as commercialized as South Africa. So the poultry industries are dominant, but we have a number of production methods that are small scale and subsistence that are actually producing eggs and broiler meat for food security. And we've spoken about the foreign funders, genetic suppliers and breeders, and the pharmaceutical. Look, this, as I say, this is an unholy alliance because generally what takes place is that we're having an industrialized system that is making our layers sick. They get antibiotics, routine antibiotics. Most of the producers claim that they don't, particularly in the broiler industry, to keep these birds as machines so that they're not susceptible to disease. And that is where the pharmaceutical company comes in, and they create and make profits. So, and it's just getting worse now with big tech because we're upscaling the industrialized system to a greater mechanized and digitalized system. And we are no longer only up against big ag, we're up against big ag, big tech, and big pharma. So some of the advisory takeaways. So from the research that we do, and we need to differentiate between broiler and egg industry, particularly on the ground. Broiler industry isn't historically using cages. So there are floor-raised, cage-free production systems. And we need to just be careful that when we are talking about poultry, that we are differentiating between the broiler and the egg industry. What is also interesting is that the term intensification has never clearly been defined within policy, not even from the FAO, United Nations and that. And we need to be actually asking for clarification on the language that is being used. Your Agenda 2063 of the African Union, sees transforming Africa to a future global superpower, and the adoption of the agricultural sector, which will impact the poultry intensification. So we need to be looking at that a little bit more in depth as to what is that roadmap? What does it look like? What are they going to be focusing on? And what is already happening within our countries? We know genetics is already a target of our indigenous breeds. And then need to challenge government on the brazen adoption of these technocratic band-aids. And without intellectual property rights being protected, what about data, access to data? Who has access to data? There are many apps being rolled out, and I was actually part of it when I was in the organic sector, where we were having these talks, and I was approached by a funder, a German funder, and they wanted the small-scale farmers that I was working with to use this app, and they were going to offer, you know, free mobile phones with it and that. And the one question I asked was, well, the information, the data that this app will be collecting, where is that going to be kept? And they said yes, at one of the universities. And I said, well, I want to know who's access to that data. To this day, I've never heard back from them. Data is valuable. It's hugely valuable. And we need to be protecting our data, and asking government how they're protecting data and who has access to data. We need more transparency around these issues. So we've already discussed how the promoters of these digital technologies and the transformation that undermines food sovereignty and peasant agroecology. So bear that in mind when we see the intensification, the process, the adoption, and that. How can we be forming narratives to actually challenge this? So yes, so this TADS, this transboundary animal disease, which is part of the SADC project. Yes, on the surface, we certainly need to know how diseases are developing, how, you know, foot and mouth disease is a huge concern, for example, and how the containment, the trade within it, the transboundary amplification and cross borders and that. But if we look at avian flu, and particularly highly pathogenic avian flu, and how industry is now looking. I attended a conference, a webinar last week with industry and with academia. And they are looking for South Africa at rolling out the vaccine for poultry. Historically, we have been concerned about, globally, there's been a concern about the rollout of any vaccine for avian flu, is particularly highly pathogenic, because of the concerns around a leaky vaccine. So a leaky vaccine basically means that it's not contained just within that poultry flock, because what can happen is that the vaccine doesn't prevent the poultry from actually getting the disease. It just prevents the symptoms, very much like what we saw with the COVID vaccine, prevents the symptoms from amplifying and being severe symptoms. But that also means with poultry industry and the trade, it means that these symptoms can go unnoticed, and therefore you are actually spreading avian flu. So historically, there has been a ban, let's say, not really, because there have been countries like China and Egypt that have used the HPA vaccines in the past, not to great results. We know that with avian flu, well, I know, some of you know, that the stamping out is an issue. That means the culling of flocks, and the manner in which they do that is absolutely horrendous. And that was to contain the spread of the virus. But we have to understand the systemic problems that are aligned or attached to these viruses, and mutations of viruses and spread of viruses. So have a look at how our SADC projects are aligned with One Health, and the issue with regards to One Health being challenged in the past also of having a technocratic lens for systemic problems and applying band-aids to this. So there are all these global issues that are also taking place within Africa. We are aligning ourselves with the rollout of the solutions, but we need to be interrogating the solutions as well. So with the food security argument of industry, food security is not in a bubble. And nutritional food security is something that we should be actually talking about, not just food security, because there's no point in having a full stomach, but it's not nutrition, it's not being fed nutritionally. So it's not in a bubble. And we need to get industry to acknowledge that it's not in a bubble. So they can't just say, oh, well, we're producing more. You know, we can't do cage-free because it will hinder our expansion. We need to get them to acknowledge that food security is not in a bubble, and what are they doing around the other issues of it. Poverty alleviation, climate change, nature conservation, and gender equality. Understanding the egg sector of each country through a desktop study has been difficult because I do not see, as I do within South Africa, what is actually happening on the ground. I monitor media. I monitor what our industry is saying almost on a daily basis. I don't have that access to what is happening in other countries. Yeah, there are some other interesting points on that. On the ground, research is important. People that are either working within the campaigns, but actually intimately understand what is happening within the egg sector, within their own country. I think just from an observational point of view, what they are viewing every day, particularly if they are engaging with small-scale farmers, understanding the issues on small-scale farmers, understanding the issues around indigenous breeds of small-scale farmers, access to feed and that, is highly valuable. And that type of information needs to be shared within the campaigns of different countries. Consumers. I have been going on about this for more than a decade. They are critical enablers of transformation within food systems. Our SAPA, our South African Poultry Association, I think it was as far back as 2014, basically said they refused to make a change because consumers weren't demanding it. The groups that were demanding it didn't eat their product. So we need to be focusing on consumer education. One of the sessions that Alicia and myself had with the some of the other campaign leaders was that we are putting the cart before the horse. We need to have a support group. We need to have an informed support group and more voices around this issue. But consumer education is key on campaigns. We need to be spending more time on consumer education. It's good to have the stalwarts. It's good to have the compassion and the voices of compassion around this issue, but industry is not going to be listening to that. Industry will not budge because of those issues and those concerns. They will make inroads and they will entertain the voice of consumers if it has a direct impact on their profit margins. Also remember that industry has they basically are bound to improve profits for their shareholders. So we are up against an industry that is profit driven, and it's profit above all else. Media relations, capacity building to inform journalists. Do journalists actually understand? Have they internalized the concerns that we have raised? Or do they just keep on hopping over to industry and say, oh, we need you making this statement, we need an industry statement to have balance? Do they understand that there is no balance within this space where there's a domination of the industry voice over decades? So to provide some balance, we need to actually have more pushback and more space and more platforms for the alternative voices within the space. The potential of informed collaboration, grassroots action within our countries. The grassroots voice is particularly important with regards to food sovereignty and food security, nutritional food security, subsistence farmers, indigenous crops. There's a lot within our countries that is taking place from a grassroots that we need to engage with. Funder-focused versus local insights and experience. Much of what I've witnessed is why we're on this repeat pattern and not really gaining that much ground, is that we are looking at what the funders are wanting from within our campaigns, and that is generally getting the commitments. But to get those commitments isn't just a matter of putting the information out there, engaging with them. As we've experienced with SAFSI, it takes years of engagement. And then what happens is that we've kind of worn them down. Another group comes in and they'll remind them what you've learned, because I've actually updated a number of groups outside the campaigns because we need level playing fields. We need to have an honest, authentic baseline communication with industry. So what industry often does is they just cycle through the groups. That's all they do. But if you remind them, actually, we've spoken about this, you've spoken about them with this group or whatever a decade ago. Let's take this conversation forward. So the local insights are important. The research is important in that, because what is your local argument towards industry? Not what necessarily is what everyone is saying. What are your pressure points within your local borders? Shared campaign challenges. We can share the victories, but we have to share the challenges, because within those challenges is, basically SAFSI has been told to shut up. Keep quiet. You're not allowed to engage with industry anymore, and that type of thing. That is actually progress, because now at least we know that industry has had to verbalize what they say behind closed doors. And we're aware of that now. And we can hold the mirror up to them, and we can ask media to hold the mirror up to them. So share those campaign challenges. When you get a no, and it's a firm no, what is being said? What is the response from industry? Because we can strategize and work on how to hold that up to industry. So yeah, sharing positive and negative experiences. Growing strategic partners in Africa, particularly within the food sovereignty groups, the agroecological groups, indigenous, small-scale producers, and grassroots groups. We need to broaden our networks and kind of really get on the ground with these people. And South Africa, we had the first global agroecology conference in Africa, in Cape Town, about 7 years ago. I spoke at that, and I focused on the consumer as having the consumer education on issues that overlap all these: food sovereignty, animal welfare, food security, all of those issues. Mapping support opportunities. Who is also supportive of these campaigns and the goals of these campaigns? If we are working with food sovereignty groups, they will definitely get on board around about the indigenous breeds. I've engaged with the agroecology groups to look at, they have not been looking very much at the livestock sector. They are now looking at the livestock sector and looking at the welfare issues. But are we engaging with the agroecology group on what they are looking at as well? So amplifying the small-scale egg farmers' voices and narratives. Are we talking to them? Do we know what their issues are? How can we support them? Further co-research opportunities, going forward on this research, looking at those gaps, the countries that we've had a look at, can we access some information to help fill those gaps from in situ countries? Tapping into existing campaigns or shared visions. I'd look at African Centre for Biodiversity, for example, and their issue on genetically modified crops. I've, over the years, engaged with Mariam Mayat on the issue on livestock and genetics around livestock on the poultry. They don't have the capacity or the funding to be looking at that, but we can have those discussions to see if we can get funding to be looking at these issues. I'm done. So, as we said, hens don't have a voice, but we do.
Definitely. Oh, thank you so much, Sonia. That is, yeah.
A lot, sorry, but it is.
I mean, you're right. I mean, we do have a voice and we need to use our voice. And it is so great to sit here today and hear about all of these findings and basically about just get a glimpse of what is happening from country to country and how maybe best we can address those challenges, because I think it helps to know the challenges we have so that we can tailor make our advocacy and even our campaigns to address those challenges, which is, I think, is a very, very important point. But I don't want to waste time. I know there's quite a few questions, so I'll hand over to Mishka to help us with those.
Thanks, Sonia. I'm going to open the floor to questions again, but before we take more questions, I do see that before you had a problem raising your hand. You may unmute yourself and ask your question if you're able to unmute yourself. To Okay. There's also another question in the chat box from Ingrid, who asked, what are the legal requirements to label eggs and how they are produced? And another question, do you mean food security or food sovereignty? Sonia, if you, I see Teboho has unmuted. So maybe let's take Teboho's question and then Ingrid's question, and then we can move on to any further questions, if that's fine.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I am just a bit confused, but I also have a comment in the confusion, because I'm wondering, this meeting, is it there to enlighten us on what the corporate world is doing, and also fast-tracking this chicken production in Africa, including the chemicals that needs to be involved and all that. And I think I heard something that says it looks like multi-corporations, they want to inject our chickens, our local chickens or indigenous chickens, so that they can become commercial. So I'm just a bit confused. Maybe I missed the introduction. Maybe I didn't understand. And then my concern is, it is so sad that in Africa, we are taken for granted. Yes, there's commercialization, there's globalization, there's who, and there's this and that. But at the end of it all, we end up eating GMOs. I've had some concerns about GMOs where the lady said 80% or she said 80% of what we eat has got, it's a GMO, millimil or something like that. But I'm just throwing around because I wasn't taking notes. So my concern is, it's so frustrating that you find organizations like, for example, SASFE, as we are now talking about all this. But at the same time, when you go back and check who is funding SASFE, you find that it is the same multi-corporations that we are discussing about right now, which means we are taking for granted. That is where my concern is. As Africans or as Africa, we are being taken granted of. Things are already done. Like she mentioned that the big farms, they
Burger, you're on mute again.
And then what's happening is the presenter said it is the big companies that have got big farming, poultry production facilities and all that stuff. But at the same time, when you dig deeper, you find that they are the very same people that are sponsoring such conversations to take place. And then I feel like as Africa, we are taken granted of. Why don't you guys come to us and say, okay, here is a major problem. We do have small scale farmers. Let's improve the running chickens in these small scale farmers without injecting them, without taking away anything, helping these small farmers to have bigger land so they can produce more of these chickens that are healthy, that have no diseases, that have no vaccines. And then when you use that campaign to move from the ground going up, then the multi-corporations will listen. It really frustrates me. So that's my concern, and that was my confusion. Thank you.
Thank you, Tobago. Those are really important insights and questions. And also, yes, so I've taken it that you are based in South Africa. We'll speak first about the indigenous breeds. So what they do is actually to look at the genetics of the breeds. And they want to improve these genetics by incorporating maybe some commercial breed genetics to that. So that will remove the breed as such, the indigenous breed, and it also allows them to claim the intellectual property rights of this new improved breed. So there are major concerns. You're quite right. And I also agree with you with regards to funding. I work by this follow the money. Who is funding and what are they funding? What are they claiming to fund versus the reality? What is the end goal? And there have been many books that particularly over the last 3 years, that are focusing on funding and funding within Africa as well. I am always there are certain NGOs that I refuse to work with because of their funders. SAFC and another NGO are the only 2 NGOs that I continue to work with. When we talk about you're looking for support for these small scale farmers, I completely agree, because I feel that if we are not supporting the small scale farmers, we are going to lose them. And even with regards to supporting, like, for example, during our latest avian flu outbreak, when the eggs were, the price of the eggs was raised tremendously, and we also didn't have that many eggs on the shelves. And industry was saying, oh, we've had to cull flocks, we don't have enough eggs and that. I knew that there were small scale farmers that had the capacity to supply those retail chains, but they didn't have access to market. So I've been working with some retailers over the years. I no longer work with them for access to market for small scale farmers. There are other groups. SAFC does not have the capacity or the funding to focus on this massive issue of the small-scale farmers that are not supported. But there are other groups like the Participatory Guarantee System, the PGS system, that I've also worked in that sector with, that are supporting small-scale farmers. They do not have the knowledge, and I've even offered to share some of the knowledge that I have with regards to the issues around livestock farming. So there are groups that are looking at the support of small-scale farmers within South Africa. I think what can be done is maybe we can give you a list of those groups that you can also see what they are currently doing and what they've done in the past with helping small-scale and subsistence farmers. I hope I've covered most of what you were asking and what your concerns were. But yes, I mean, it's a broken food system. It's designed, it's not by accident, it's broken on purpose. So we are up against a lot, but knowledge brings power. Sorry, there was another question with regards to the egg labeling. I think it was Ingrid.
I was going to say the question in the chat box around egg labeling, the legal requirements around labeled eggs and how they are produced, and as well as the difference between food security and food sovereignty.
So I was part of in 2014 of this egg labeling. It's part of our Agricultural Production Systems APS Act. And it was very frustrating because during that process on egg labeling, government refused to include caged eggs as a description within the Act. Therefore, it wouldn't be, no labeling would be enforced on it. There is another process that is taking place, and there are groups that are looking at the egg labeling to enforce the labeling of cage production. Part of that is so that consumers can make an informed choice. But from my perspective, what is also very important is that most of the consumers don't even know about cage production. And just by labeling it, they can start asking questions. It was the same thing with the GMO labeling. Consumers are in the dark about GMOs. If it's labeled, they will actually start understanding that there are issues within our food system. I would like to rather give you a concise and proper description of food sovereignty versus food security. So food sovereignty is more about culturally accepted food, so indigenous foods for that particular community, country, or group. And it's so basically, it's not only about consuming food that is indigenous, but it's about having access and being able to grow food that is culturally relevant to a particular group. And the most widely agreed definition was from the International Food Sovereignty Forum in Mali in 2007. Is the right of people to healthy and culturally appropriate food produced through ecologically sound and sustainable methods, and the right to define their own food and agricultural systems. That's the Neleni 2015, and it was via Via Campesino. So the food sovereignty and then versus food security does not need to be, the food that is being grown does not need to be culturally appropriate food. So that is why government even talks about agro-processing and processed food as a means for food security, because it's about having access to food. Doesn't matter if it's culturally relevant or even nutritional or even healthy, there is food. And that we can see, this is very much how the Green Revolution has been able to push through GMOs, because they spoke about increasing yields. And we've known that they failed at that. It won't be acknowledged that they failed at it, but that's where the genetically modified is, increasing yields. And food security, government can talk about food security, because then they can talk about upscaling, intensification, and increasing of yield. This is where government should be challenged on nutritional food security, and this is why I say food sovereignty is something that industry can never achieve, because they cannot produce culturally appropriate food for particular groups. And go back.
Thanks so much, Sonia.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing any other hands or questions in the chat box. So I think in the interest of time, I'll hand over to Zwelisha. But if there are questions, feel free to post them in the chat box. And Sonia, perhaps you can respond directly in the chat. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mr. And thank you, Sonia, and everyone for joining us today and basically on this engaging conversation. And yeah, I mean, a lot is coming out of this. Particularly for me, what is very clear is that there's a lot of work to be done in different spheres on this campaign, the cage-free campaign in Africa, to make sure that we have Africa like a continent that doesn't really promote cruelty, and we make sure that we don't have cages, present in our farming systems. But I think there is a need for a reform in the farming system, and there is a need for even more people knowing about these issues. I mean, today, like we had so many of us here, and I think we need to take this to our communities. That is a call from me to you, to take this to our community. I think one of the most powerful tools to spread awareness is word of mouth. So I think on our next webinar, I'll be happy to see the number that we had today double. And I think it is all our responsibility as form of advocacy to, spread the word, speak about these issues, highlight the issues that we see in the egg industry. I mean, another comment I saw now is talking about basically how big companies, and there's a move being designed towards making sure that eggs are only available for the elites. And I mean, you can't, we can see how things are going, working on this space, and how it is like there's so much gatekeeping, and there's so much secrecy and lack of transparency, and I think that those are the things we need to speak about. And to that effect, SAPSI is basically at the moment, as Sonia mentioned earlier, calling out another industry regulatory bodies to basically end the secrecy, so that we can engage companies, because we believe we engage them fairly, and we need to be able to engage them without fear of being blocked and bullied to stop engaging them. So my colleague will share the link here where you can support our campaign to basically spread more awareness about what the industry is doing against us, SAPSI and other retailers. You can support, check our online pages, make sure that you keep your eyes there, join the Fast Action Network, and spread the word about the Fast Action Network, because I'm sure this year we'll have campaigns whereby we're spreading awareness. We also are campaigning against companies to make sure that they do the right thing. So my colleague has shared some of the links on the group, on the chats, that you can click on and basically see what we're doing and support and engage with the content that is out there, and engage with our campaign and spread the word, raise awareness. But all in all, above everything, I want to say a huge thank you on behalf of SAPSI, the cage-free team, and basically all of us who are here and those who couldn't be here. I just want to say thank you. And I think now is a perfect time for us to basically turn our cameras on so we can take the group photo. I think Matapelo is helping us with that. I know we've heard a lot of depressing news today. We had a lot of depressing findings, but I would like for us to maybe, show, put our video on, crack a smile and take that picture.
Video is disabled.
Yeah, those three slides I'm taking. Everyone.
Have you guys taken the picture? The group photo?
Yes, I am. Just the last one and
Japan, you are still slow.
thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We've taken the picture, but before we leave, I think as per protocol, we will end things with a prayer just to say thank you for being able to be here until this point, and basically, share our gratitude. So I'm going to open the floor to one person to help us with the prayer. But if nobody is willing or is putting their hand up, I'm going to start. So this is open to anyone who wants to close with the prayer for us. Nathania, are you able to close with the prayer for us? Nima,
Let us pray.
Thank you so much.
Let us pray. Father, in the name of Jesus, we want to thank you for such an opportunity, for such beautiful engagements. We want to thank you for such informed discussions. Here we are, our Father, with the knowledge that we have gained today. We pray for each one of us that we are able to help other people understand what is at stake, and we are able to advocate for what is right and what is good, and for the nutrition that communities and traditional groups need. We pray in the name of Jesus, and we thank our facilitators and everyone that has helped us here today. This we ask in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, everyone. We'll keep in touch and we'll share the materials with everyone. Please be on the lookout for that, and we look forward to seeing you again on another webinar that we're going to have in future. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the presentation. God bless. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Thank you for the session.
Everyone. Bye for now. Thank you, Sonia. You're a star.
Thank you, people. Thank you, leaders.
Thank you. Thank you. Good day, everyone.
Thank you.